Hello, it's John Heaton, and today I'm going to do a discussion on different levels of Beatles fandom and within the Beatles fan base itself, and also within the wider world. You know, because believe it or not everyone likes the Beatles, and whenever I come across someone who doesn't like the Beatles, I kind of am a bit incredulous. Can't really believe what I'm hearing, but they do exist out there. But even within the world of my inner circle of friends, who are my Beatle fan friends, that we don't always reach agreement, even on which is the best album or which are the best songs or the worst songs. And the same goes for the solo career. I've got many friends who are Beatles fans but less obsessed than me, to a greater or lesser extent, and it's interesting to hear their views. I try not to react too aggressively to whatever they're saying. I've got a friend called Tim who's reluctantly admits the Beatles are the best band ever, but he's very anti-McCartney, particularly post-Beatles, and even within the Beatles he's always slagging him off, which pisses me off, but I try to restrain myself. I've got another friend called Farkash whose favourite is George Harrison, without question, although he's not a mega fan. I've got a friend called Marcus who's a pretty big fan but doesn't rate the solo career of Paul McCartney or Ringo Starr. I've got a friend called Lou who called the early Beatles lyrics banal, which maybe she's got a point. Interesting, as school friends, well, quite a few school friends with hindsight have thanked me for getting them into the Beatles, because I was playing them quite a lot. I was at boarding school and they were obviously influenced, but quite a few people reacted against the Beatles and didn't like them because I was such a fan. And I remember playing the new Lennon single in 1980, Starting Over, and we were all listening intently to it, and this friend of mine, Gary Cressman, just at the end of it said, "Sorry, it's too 50s in style, don't like it." So, and also when the new George Harrison single came on the radio faster, I remember people saying, "This is not very good, is it?" So I had to put up with a lot of stick at school, but anyway, that's another matter. Family is an interesting one, because I have a younger brother who probably was influenced by me to an extent and got into the Beatles and ELO, but he's less obsessed than me. And even to this day, he teases me about the White Album being 50% bad, and even tried going through it track by track, and he does indeed not like at least 40% of it, so that's a bit disappointing. My parents did have a couple of Beatles albums in the house, Sgt. Pepper and Abbey Road, but I don't think they delved too deep into the catalogue other than that. But I remember my dad once saying that he liked From Me to You. He thought it was a well-constructed song, so that was interesting. It's interesting to see what the critics made of the Beatles. Well, not so much the group, because they were pretty unanimous in terms of praising the group, apart from, I think it was Rolling Stone panned Sgt. Pepper when it came out, which is a bit of a shock. But in the early 70s, a lot of Paul's albums were getting very bad reviews. And even in the late 70s, I was reading the Rolling Stone review of Back to the Egg the other day, and it's a terrible review. If you read it, it's really quite insulting and literally doesn't say there's any redeeming features at all. Sorriest load of drivel or something was one of the remarks, and I had to put up with this at school because Melody Maker and Sounds and NME were obviously around the place, and it was pretty depressing to read a negative review of a New Wings album. But it's interesting how the critics have changed their tune in latter years, so that the elder statesmen, Paul Simon, Bob Dylan, McCartney in particular I'm thinking of, they're loath to criticise. So when you get a new album, they're kind of bending over backwards to say this is great, even though it's not, or it may not be. And I found that a bit annoying, and quite a contrast to the sort of vindictive reviews that they were lashing out in the 70s. They didn't pull any punches then, but now they seem to be treating them with so much respect that they can't say anything critical. If you look at the general public, I'm not sure. Let's take a song like Obla Di, Obla Da, for example. I know my Hungarian father-in-law loves it, and he can't understand any English, but he obviously loves the bouncy tune. and it was a big hit single for Marmalade, and it's a pretty popular song amongst the Beatle fan base, although it does divide opinion. I was reading a very heated exchange on Facebook on the Nothing Is Real Facebook page when someone said Obla-Dee is a great track, and there was loads of comments saying it's not. And the same goes for Maxwell Silverhammer. It really does divide the fan base, and I've never really understood it. Or take a song like Ebony and Ivory, huge #1 singles. A lot of people bought it, but if you speak to the average man in the street, most people seem to hate it. So it's a bit incongruous there. I don't really understand how the maths works, but I guess it's either you love it or you hate it, and the same goes for Mull of Kintyre. And the Frog song obviously Paul came in for a lot of stick for that, and I don't know if that's just because they don't like it. I mean, I think it's a children's song and it has to be taken on that level. That's always been my view of the Frog song. There's a lot of fans out there who have favourite Beatles, and a lot of fans say John and George were the hip ones and McCartney was a bit twee, and I've been used to fighting that battle for many, many years, although I haven't got a favourite Beatle musically. I've always said that, even though personality-wise I think John was the most interesting. If you look at online fandom, there's obviously a pretty fanatical bunch of people out there who are just like mega loyal fans, whether it be McCartney or Lennon, and these days it tends to be more McCartney fans defending his work, and also that small section of McCartney fan base who buy up everything on coloured vinyl and help the McCartney 3 album to get to #1. And I've really got not much to say about that, other than the fact I think I don't agree with it. It's over the top, and there are people out there who just buy every single thing that comes out, and I think it's unnecessary, but it's up to them, I suppose, if they want to spend their money. If you look at Spotify, then Here Comes the Sun from George Harrison is the most popular song, so that's interesting. Come Together's up there. So I think, and then there was a couple of discussions, me and Mr. Mayo and Pop Goes the 60s the other day about, is it worth listening to the post-81 solo records? Well, I would say if you don't like Wings, you're not really going to enjoy latter-day McCartney, so there's not much point in seeking it out. You might be surprised. But I tend to, people I meet who don't like McCartney don't tend to change their spots halfway through, although David Jenner, you are an exception because you like Flaming Pie, having dished most of Wings' output, so you're the exception to that. I must admit I have a 70s bias back to the time when I was 14, 15, 16, when London Town, Back to the Egg, McCartney 2, Double Fantasy came out. Those are albums very close to my heart because I remember buying them on the first day of release, and I'm not part of this rivalry between saying John is the best or Paul is the best. At the end of the day, it's about the music, it's not about the product, it's not about rivalry between the Beatles. They all contributed, as we know, and it wouldn't have been the Beatles without any one of them. I think all 4 of them were needed, chemistry-wise. And just to finish with, I'm going to give you 4 solo albums, which I enjoy defending, which have got pretty bad stick over the years. I mean, the first one is Bad Boy from Ringo, 1978. I think this is a nice little album, and nice tracks co-written with Vinnie Poncia, and good cover of Lipstick Traces, and pretty good cover of Where Did Our Love Go, and it's a pretty decent album. Dr. John's playing piano and Dee Murray's on bass. Back to the Egg. Well, I'm always defend this album because it got slagged off, as I say, at the time by most critics in the UK and the US. I'm not sure about elsewhere around the world, but Rolling Stone really laid into it quite unfairly, I think. It did okay in the charts, got to #8, but that wasn't particularly good by McCartney standards. But it's a nice little album, and I actually went to Lim Castle in Kent the other day with a couple of friends and did a few videos on location there in the Great Hall where they recorded Old Siam Sir video. And I've yet to edit those together to show you, but they're interesting. If you're in the Kent area by the coast down there, visit Lim Castle, it's well worth a visit. So the other album I enjoy defending is Extra Texture, and this is a Fame copy of Extra Texture, which is interesting primarily for being on the Green Apple, which is always nice to see. This came out in '82, I think, but the amount of stick this album's come come in for is ridiculous over the years. I know me and Mr. Mayo said there's only 3 good tracks, and he absolutely detests the rest of the album. Whereas another friend of mine, Dave Costello, for years and years was quite silent about this album, and then seemingly discovered it quite recently, or a few years ago, and said it was very soulful, and he likes it a lot. And it does. You have to be in the right mood to listen to it, and it's quite depressing, but it's actually some good stuff on it, and good musicianship as always on George albums. So I'll defend that. And then Sometime in New York City. Well, obviously this was very unpopular with the public and the critics. But it's got, you watch that 1-to-1 film which came out recently, and it shows that this period is very interesting for John, and this album is no exception, and it's got some very interesting stuff, albeit slightly dated because of what it's talking about, but it wouldn't be without it. So that's my discussion on Beatles fandom. I'm probably somewhere in the middle. I'm not the most fanatical fan out there ever who buys everything, but I'm not a sort of dip your toe in the waters guy. I will listen to everything they put out, solo or group-wise, and I will judge it accordingly. And I like sort of 100% of the group stuff, or 99% of the group stuff, and probably sort of 80% of the solo stuff. The only time I'll get a bit disappointed is on a few latter-day Ringo albums, and a couple of latter-day Paul albums I think have let the side down a bit. But anyway, that's minor criticism in the grand scheme of things. I'm still a huge fan, and I try to get things in perspective and not let it take over my life completely. I have other interests as well, but once a fan, always a fan. So thank you for watching. See you next time.